After I punched my wife's brother for pouring hot spaghetti on my head at the family reunion, everyone ignored me, even my wife. You should take every insult and apologize, she said. Instead of apologizing, I bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii. 5 minutes later, I received 315 desperate messages and calls. So here's the thing about family reunions. They're like root canals, except at least with root canals, you get good drugs and nobody expects you to smile through the whole damn thing. But there I was, sitting in this barn-style dining hall that looked like someone had watched too many episodes of Fixer Upper and decided rustic chic was the way to go, surrounded by the Prescott clan in all their designer-clad glory. The smell hit you like a freight train the second you walked in. Marinara sauce bubbling away in those industrial-sized warmers, garlic bread that probably came from some fancy bakery in the city, and enough cologne and perfume to choke a horse. Seriously, Uncle Howard must have bathed in that stuff. I'm pretty sure I caught a contact high, just sitting downwind from the guy. I'd strategically positioned myself at the long pine table like some kind of social warfare expert, hands folded in front of me like I was back in 3rd grade waiting for Mrs. Henderson to tell me whether my book report on Where the Red Fern Grows was going to cut it. You know that feeling when you're trying so hard to blend into the furniture that you practically become one with the wood grain? Yeah, that was me, human wallpaper at the Prescott Family Spectacular. But then there was Marissa, my wife of 6 years, and man, she was absolutely glowing. I'm talking full-on lighthouse beacon here, laughing at something her cousin Sophie had just whispered in her ear. Her whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since. Hell, I couldn't even remember the last time. Maybe our honeymoon. Before reality set in, and she realized she'd married the guy who shops at Target instead of Nordstrom and thinks a fancy dinner is anything that doesn't come in a drive-through bag. The rest of her family had claimed their spots around the table like they were marking territory. Uncle Howard sat there in his tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And my car isn't exactly a beater, mind you. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of a whiskey ad, all Silver Fox confidence, and I own half the city energy. Then there was Aunt Margot, dripping in so much gold jewelry, she could have been mistaken for a walking Fort Knox exhibit. Every time she moved, it sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. And then, of course, there was Tristan. Tristan. Marissa's beloved brother, who'd made it crystal clear from day one that I wasn't exactly his first choice for brother-in-law material. The guy had the kind of face that screamed, I peaked in prep school, and I'm going to make that everyone else's problem. 6 years we'd been doing this dance. 6 years of him looking at me like I was something he'd scraped off his Italian leather shoes. The conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream. All talk about ski trips to Aspen that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Wine tastings in Napa, where they probably spent more on a bottle than I made in a week, and exclusive charity galas that had guest lists tighter than Fort Knox. You know, the kind of events where they don't just check your name at the door, they check your net worth, your family tree, and probably your credit score while they're at it. I nursed my water like it was liquid courage, which, let's face it, it basically was at this point. The ice cubes clinked against the glass every time my hands shook just a little. Not from nerves, mind you, but from the sheer effort it took to keep my mouth shut while they talked about their problems, like whether the caviar at last week's fundraiser was subpar or if their personal trainers were charging too much for house calls. So the decorator says the marble we picked out might clash with the new chandelier, Aunt Margot was saying, waving her fork around like she was conducting an orchestra. Can you imagine? After we specifically told him we wanted something that would complement the existing color scheme. Sophie nodded sympathetically, like this was truly one of life's great tragedies. Oh, the same thing happened to us with the pool house renovation. You really can't trust anyone these days. I took another sip of water, wondering if anyone would notice if I just slowly slid under the table and army crawled my way to freedom. Probably not. I was about as invisible to these people as their housekeeping staff. That's when Tristan decided to make his move. He'd been eyeing me all evening like a cat watching a mouse, just waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. He leaned forward, that trademark smirk spreading across his face like spilled wine on white carpet. Ugly and impossible to ignore. Grayson, he drawled, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. You're being awfully quiet tonight. What's the matter, buddy? Did your little hometown never teach you how to keep up with adult conversation? The chuckles that rolled down that table hit me like a slap in the face. Not the kind of genuine laughter you hear when someone tells an actually funny joke, but that polite, superior kind of laughter that says, "We're laughing at you, not with you, and we want to make sure you know it." I felt my jaw clench, felt that familiar heat creeping up my neck that always showed up when I was about 2 seconds away from saying something that would probably end with me sleeping on the couch. But I forced myself to smile. One of those tight, fake smiles that feels like it might crack your face in half if you hold it too long. Just enjoying the conversation. I managed to get out, my voice steady, even though my hands were practically vibrating with the effort it took not to reach across the table and show Tristan exactly what this small-town boy had learned about conflict resolution. But that wasn't good enough for him. Oh no, Tristan was just getting warmed up. I mean, we're talking about real estate in the Hamptons, and you look like someone just started speaking ancient Greek. Maybe we should switch to discussing. I don't know, what do people talk about where you're from? Tractor pulls? County fair pie contests? More laughter. Louder this time. Even Uncle Howard cracked a smile, like watching his nephew tear apart his niece's husband was quality family entertainment. I caught Marissa's eye across the table, looking for backup, for solidarity, for anything that resembled the us against the world mentality we used to have. Instead, I got that look, the one I'd become way too familiar with over the past few years. That subtle shake of the head, that slight narrowing of the eyes that said, "Don't you dare make a scene," louder than if she'd screamed it across the room. "Let it go," that look said. "Just take it and smile and pretend like it doesn't bother you, because heaven forbid we upset the delicate ecosystem of Prescott family dynamics." So I sat there, water glass sweating in my palm, marinara sauce growing cold on the serving platters, surrounded by the sound of their laughter and the smell of their expensive cologne, and I let it go. Just like I always did. Just like they expected me to. But something was different this time. Something was building in my chest, hot and tight and dangerous. Maybe it was the way Tristan's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Or maybe it was the way Marissa looked away like she was embarrassed to be married to me. Or maybe it was just 6 years of this crap finally reaching its breaking point. Whatever it was, I had a feeling this family reunion was about to get a lot more interesting than anyone had bargained for. You know how they say time slows down right before a car crash? Well, apparently the same thing happens right before your brother-in-law decides to turn you into a walking Italian restaurant advertisement. 1 second I'm sitting there picking at my Caesar salad, which, by the way, had enough anchovies to stock a small aquarium. And the next second I'm watching Tristan rise from his chair like some kind of designer-clad villain in a really twisted dinner theater production. The conversation had moved on from my apparent lack of sophistication to discussing their latest investment properties. Uncle Howard was going on about some waterfront condo he'd just snagged in Miami, gesturing with his wine glass like he was conducting a symphony of his own awesomeness. "The view from the penthouse is absolutely divine," he was saying. "You can see clear to the horizon on a good day." "Oh, Howard, you simply must show us the photos again," Aunt Margot gushed, her gold bracelets jangling like a one-woman percussion section. "The marble in that kitchen is just exquisite." I was trying to calculate exactly how many months of my salary that condo probably cost when Tristan made his move. He stood up smooth as silk, reaching for the big ceramic serving dish that held enough spaghetti marinara to feed a small Italian village. For a split second, I thought he was just going for seconds. Hell, the guy ate like he had a hollow leg, probably burned calories just from being such an ass. But then I saw it. That look in his eyes. The same look he'd had at Marissa's and my wedding when he'd accidentally bumped into me during the father-daughter dance, causing me to stumble and nearly take out the whole wedding party like bowling pins. Pure, calculated malice wrapped up in a Polo Ralph Lauren package. "Grayson," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern, "you look a little pale. Maybe you need some color in your life." That should have been my cue to duck, to roll, to do literally anything except sit there like a deer in headlights. But my brain was still processing the fact that a grown man, a 34-year-old investment banker who wore cufflinks to casual dinners, was actually considering what I thought he was considering. And then he did it. The ceramic dish tilted, and suddenly I was getting an up-close and personal introduction to every ingredient in Aunt Margot's famous marinara recipe. Hot sauce hit my scalp first, then came the noodles, long, slimy pasta sliding down my face like the world's worst facial treatment. The temperature was somewhere between fresh from the stove and third-degree burn, and I felt every drop as it soaked through my button-down shirt and pooled in my lap. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire dining hall went dead silent. Not the comfortable kind of quiet you get when everyone's focused on their food, but that horrible, suffocating silence that happens when 30 people simultaneously realize they just witnessed something that definitely wasn't in the evening's program. Then Tristan started laughing. It wasn't just a chuckle or even a regular laugh. This was the kind of deep, belly-shaking laughter that comes from pure, unadulterated joy at someone else's humiliation. The sound echoed off the barn-style walls, bouncing around the room like it was specifically designed to make sure everyone heard just how funny he found the sight of his sister's husband wearing dinner instead of eating it. I sat there for a moment, sauce dripping from my chin onto my ruined shirt, noodles hanging from my hair like the world's most pathetic Christmas ornaments. Around the table, I could see everyone's faces frozen in various expressions of shock, amusement, and what might charitably be called concern if you squinted really hard and had a vivid imagination. Aunt Margot had her hand pressed to her chest like she was having vapors, but her eyes were bright with the kind of excitement people get when they witness a really good train wreck. Sophie was covering her mouth, but I could see the grin underneath her fingers. Uncle Howard was shaking his head, but more in the boys will be boys way than the this is completely unacceptable way. And Marissa? Marissa just sat there looking like someone had told her the stock market had crashed and taken her trust fund with it. Not horrified that her husband had just been publicly humiliated, not angry that her brother had just crossed about 15 different lines of basic human decency, just disappointed. Like I'd somehow failed her by existing in the same space as flying pasta. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way the sauce was starting to burn my scalp, or maybe it was the sound of Tristan's continuing laughter, or maybe it was just 6 years of swallowing every insult, every slight, every joke at my expense finally reaching critical mass. But I stood up, pasta falling from my shoulders like some kind of carb-heavy confetti, and I felt my right hand ball into a fist before my brain even caught up with the program. The punch connected with Tristan's jaw with a sound that was part slap, part crack, and entirely satisfying. Physics took over from there. His head snapped back, his designer loafers lost their grip on the polished floor, and he went down like a sack of overpriced potatoes, taking a chair with him in a crash that would have made a stuntman proud. The silence that followed was somehow even more complete than before. This wasn't shocked silence. This was, holy crap, the quiet guy just laid out the golden boy silence. The kind of quiet that makes you realize you can hear the air conditioning humming and someone's stomach growling 3 tables over. Aunt Margot was the first to break. "Tristan," she shrieked, rushing to her precious nephew like he'd been shot instead of simply introduced to the concept of consequences. "Someone call a doctor. He could have a concussion." Uncle Howard was muttering something about keeping things civil and what will people think, because apparently the real tragedy here wasn't that his nephew had just assaulted someone with dinner, but that it might reflect poorly on the family name. Sophie was wide-eyed, phone already out, probably texting her friends about the drama unfolding in real time. OMG, you guys are not going to believe what just happened at the reunion. And through it all, Marissa remained seated, not jumping up to check if I was hurt, not telling her family that what Tristan did was completely out of line, not even asking if I was okay. She just sat there, staring at me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin by defending myself. Tristan was starting to come around, Aunt Margot fussing over him like he was made of spun glass instead of entitlement and bad decisions. His jaw was already starting to swell, and I couldn't help but think it was a good look on him. Really brought out the asshole in his eyes. "You're insane," he mumbled through what I hoped was going to be a spectacular bruise. I was just having a little fun. Fun, right? Because nothing says good times like assault with a deadly marinara. I wiped sauce from my eyes, feeling it stick to my fingers like some kind of Italian-flavored superglue, and looked around the room at all these people who were supposed to be family. Not a single person had moved to help me clean up. Not one napkin had been offered. Nobody had said, "Hey, maybe dumping hot food on someone isn't exactly appropriate dinner behavior." Instead, they were all looking at me like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd violated some sacred family code by having the audacity to hit back, when someone literally poured dinner on my head. The marinara was starting to cool, which somehow made it feel even worse, going from scalding humiliation to cold, sticky shame in real time. I could feel it soaking through my shirt, probably staining my undershirt too, and I wondered absently if marinara sauce was one of those things that never really comes out no matter how much bleach you throw at it. Standing there in that barn-style hall, surrounded by fake rustic charm and real family dysfunction, covered in pasta sauce and noodles like some kind of demented scarecrow, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I wasn't family to these people. I was entertainment. A target. The designated punching bag they could all feel superior to when they needed a boost to their collective ego. And the worst part? Marissa was just going to let it happen. Again, walking out of that dining hall felt like escaping from a burning building. Except instead of smoke, I was leaving behind a cloud of designer perfume, passive-aggressive tension, and the lingering smell of marinara sauce that was probably going to haunt my nostrils for the next week. The wide porch wrapped around the front of the reunion hall like a wooden embrace, and for the first time all evening, I could actually breathe without feeling like I was drowning in other people's expectations. The night air hit my sauce-covered face like a cool slap of reality. Out here, away from the theatrical gasps and pearl-clutching performance art happening inside, I could finally hear myself think. Unfortunately, what I was thinking wasn't exactly suitable for polite company. I grabbed my shirt sleeve and started wiping marinara off my cheeks, which was about as effective as trying to clean up a crime scene with a tissue. But hey, at least I was doing something productive. My hair was still sticky with sauce, and every time I ran my fingers through it, I came away with more evidence of Tristan's idea of family fun. Chunks of tomato, bits of basil, and enough garlic to ward off every vampire in a 50-mile radius. I probably looked like I'd lost a fight with a pasta factory, which, come to think of it, wasn't that far from the truth. The porch light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp, casting everything in that yellowish glow that makes everyone look like they're coming down with jaundice. I leaned against the wooden railing, feeling the splinters through my ruined shirt, and tried to process what had just happened in there. In the span of about 10 minutes, I'd gone from invisible family disappointment to public enemy number one, all because I'd had the audacity to defend myself when someone literally dumped dinner on my head. That's when I heard the screen door creak behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I could practically feel the waves of disapproval radiating from the doorway like heat from a furnace. Marissa's footsteps were crisp against the wooden planks, each one sounding like a little judgment hammer hitting the nail of my coffin. "Well," she said, and I could hear her crossing her arms without even looking. That was quite a performance in there. I turned around slowly, sauce still dripping from my collar, and looked at my wife of 6 years. The woman I'd promised to love, honor, and cherish until death do us part. The woman who was currently looking at me like I'd just kicked a basket of puppies in front of a group of kindergartners. "Performance?" I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "Your brother just dumped hot pasta on my head, and you think I put on a performance?" She was doing that thing she did when she was trying to be reasonable, tilting her head slightly to the side, speaking in that measured tone that therapists probably learn in school. "You know how Tristan is," she said, like that explained everything. Like how Tristan was some kind of natural disaster we all just had to learn to live with, like hurricanes or tax season. "Yeah," I said, wiping more sauce off my neck. "I know exactly how Tristan is. He's an entitled jackass who thinks other people exist solely for his entertainment." Marissa's expression didn't change, which somehow made it worse. If she'd gotten angry, if she'd yelled, if she'd shown any kind of emotion at all, I might have been able to work with that. But this cold, clinical disappointment? This was like trying to argue with a customer service robot. "You should apologize," she said, and for a second I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe the marinara had gotten in my ears along with everything else. "I should what now? Apologize? To Tristan? To the family? You embarrassed all of us tonight." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the moment when she'd crack a smile and tell me she was kidding. But her face remained as serious as a tax audit, and I realized she was completely, 100% sincere. "Let me get this straight," I said, feeling that dangerous heat building in my chest again. "Your brother pours scalding hot food on my head in front of 30 people, and I'm the one who needs to apologize?" "You know how important these family gatherings are," she continued, like I hadn't spoken at all. Uncle Howard was talking about potentially bringing you into one of his investment projects. But after tonight, she trailed off, shaking her head like I'd just blown our shot at winning the lottery. And maybe I had, from her perspective. Maybe losing out on Uncle Howard's largesse was worse than watching her husband get publicly humiliated by her psychopath brother. You should take every insult and apologize, she said, and there it was. The mission statement of our marriage, laid out in plain English under a buzzing porch light, while I stood there covered in marinara sauce like some kind of walking Italian food advertisement. I should take every insult, every slight, every joke at my expense, every casual cruelty that her family dished out like party favors. And then I should apologize for existing, for breathing their air, for daring to marry above my station, and for getting my place in their carefully constructed social hierarchy. He poured hot food on me. I repeated, because apparently I needed to say it louder for the people in the back. Hot food on my head. Marissa shrugged, actually shrugged, like someone had asked her opinion about the weather. You know how Tristan is. There it was again. The ultimate excuse, the get-out-of-jail-free card that apparently covered everything from casual cruelty to actual assault. Tristan could probably burn down an orphanage, and Marissa would just shrug and say, well, you know how Tristan is. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 6 years of accumulated resentment and the sound of insects buzzing around the porch light. Inside, I could hear the muffled sounds of the family regrouping, probably already spinning the story into something where I was the villain and poor Tristan was the victim of my unprovoked attack. I'm not apologizing, I said finally. Not to him, not to them, not to anybody. Marissa's mouth tightened into that thin line that meant I'd just failed another test I didn't know I was taking. Then you're making a choice, Grayson. You're choosing your pride over our marriage, over our future, over everything we've built together. Everything we'd built together. Right. Like our marriage was some kind of joint construction project instead of 6 years of me slowly disappearing into the background while she chose her family's approval over her husband's dignity at every single turn. What exactly have we built, Marissa? I asked, spreading my arms wide, sauce flying off my sleeves. A relationship where your family treats me like garbage and you expect me to smile and ask for seconds? She didn't answer, just turned on her heel like I was a disappointing employee who'd just been fired. Her footsteps clicked across the porch planks with military precision, each step taking her further away from me and closer to the warm glow of family acceptance waiting inside. If you don't come back in there and make this right, she said without turning around, don't bother coming home tonight. And then she was gone, the screen door slamming behind her with a finality that echoed across the empty porch. I stood there alone under the buzzing light, marinara sauce cooling on my skin, listening to the distant sound of laughter from inside the hall. They were probably already back to discussing wine tastings and ski trips, the unpleasant interruption of my existence already filed away and forgotten. I looked down at my ruined shirt, at the sauce stains that would never come out, at the physical evidence of what happened when you tried to stand up for yourself in the Prescott family ecosystem. Then I looked at the door Marissa had just walked through, leading back to a world where I was expected to apologize for being humiliated, where my worth was measured by how much abuse I could absorb without fighting back. Standing there on that porch, with the night air cooling the sauce on my scalp and the sound of my in-laws' laughter drifting through the windows, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. If I walked back through that door, if I went back in there and apologized for defending myself, I'd be stepping right back into the same cage they'd kept me in for 6 years. The only question was whether I had the guts to stay outside. Driving away from that reunion hall felt like breaking out of prison, if prison was decorated in rustic barn chic and smelled like disappointed rich people. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, not from adrenaline anymore, but from something that felt suspiciously like freedom. Every mile I put between myself and the Prescott family circus was another breath of air that actually belonged to me. My phone had been buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a jar ever since I'd gotten in the car, lighting up the dashboard with notification after notification. I could see Marissa's name flashing repeatedly, interspersed with numbers I recognized as various members of her family tree. Probably Uncle Howard trying to have a word with me, or Aunt Margot wanting to lecture me about proper family behavior, or hell, maybe even Tristan himself calling to gloat about his marinara masterpiece. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, you realize you've got nothing left to lose. And ignoring their calls felt better than any therapy session I'd ever imagined. 10 miles down the road, I spotted the familiar glow of a gas station rising out of the darkness like a fluorescent oasis. One of those 24-hour joints that looks like it was designed by someone who'd never seen daylight. All harsh white lighting and reflective surfaces that make everything look like a crime scene waiting to happen. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires crunching over gravel and discarded lottery tickets, and just sat there for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see the usual late-night gas station ecosystem in full swing. A trucker filling up his rig while talking on a headset, probably explaining to his wife why he was running late again. A college kid counting out crumpled dollar bills for gas money, looking like he was calculating whether he'd have enough left over for ramen noodles. A woman in scrubs who was obviously pulling a double shift, moving with that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from keeping the world running while everyone else sleeps. Real people, living real lives, dealing with real problems. Not a single one of them was worried about whether their caviar was properly chilled or if their personal trainer was charging too much for house calls. I turned off the engine and really looked at myself in the rearview mirror for the first time since the pasta incident. I looked like I'd lost a fight with an Olive Garden kitchen, sauce stains on my shirt that were already setting into permanent reminders of tonight's festivities, my hair still sticky with marinara, and something in my eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It took me a minute to recognize what it was. It was possibility. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights hummed with the kind of white noise that makes you feel like you're in a spaceship. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his phone just long enough to nod at me, which was about 1,000 times more acknowledgement than I'd gotten from my in-laws all evening. I grabbed a bottle of water and some napkins, trying to clean the worst of the sauce off my face while I figured out what the hell I was going to do next. That's when I spotted the sign advertising free Wi-Fi, and suddenly I had a plan. Or maybe not a plan exactly, but at least an idea that didn't involve going home to face Marissa's disappointed silence or sleeping on the couch like a dog who'd had an accident on the carpet. I pulled out my phone, ignored the 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, and opened up a travel website. The screen loaded with all those cheerful vacation photos, couples holding hands on beaches, families laughing over dinner, people living their best lives in places where nobody gave a damn about your pedigree or your portfolio. Where do you want to go? The search bar asked, cursor blinking patiently like it had all the time in the world for me to figure out my life. Anywhere, I thought. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but back to that house where I'd spent 6 years shrinking myself down to fit into spaces that were never meant for me in the first place. Somewhere warm, somewhere far away, somewhere nobody knew my name or cared about my marriage or expected me to apologize for existing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then I typed 4 letters that felt like a prayer, HAWA. The search results populated faster than I expected, like the universe was just waiting for me to finally make a decision. Flights to Honolulu, hotel deals, car rentals, all the infrastructure of escape laid out in neat little rows with prices and times and the promise of 80-degree weather year-round. I clicked on the first airline result and found myself staring at a departure time that made my heart skip. Flight 447 to Honolulu, departing in 5 hours and 12 minutes. Red-eye special. Probably full of honeymooners and people running away from their problems, which made it perfect for my current situation. The price made me wince a little. One-way tickets aren't exactly budget-friendly, especially when you're buying them at the last minute. But then I thought about Uncle Howard's condo that cost more than most people's houses, about Aunt Margot's jewelry collection that could probably fund a small country, about all the money the Prescott family threw around like confetti while treating me like I should be grateful for the privilege of breathing their air. Screw it. I pulled out my credit card, the one Marissa was always telling me to use more responsibly, the one that came with lectures about our budget and our future and our 5-year plan. Tonight, it was going to buy me something I hadn't had in years, a choice that was entirely my own. The booking process was surprisingly simple, like the website understood that people making these kinds of decisions at gas stations at 11 p.m. weren't looking for complicated forms and multiple confirmation screens. Name, card number, confirmation of seat assignment, and suddenly I was holding a digital boarding pass on my phone that said Grayson Mitchell, Honolulu, Hawaii, seat 23A. 23A. A window seat, which felt appropriate somehow. I'd be able to watch the mainland disappear beneath the clouds, watch everything I'd been trying so hard to fit into shrink down to nothing while I flew towards something completely unknown. The confirmation email hit my inbox with a cheerful ding, complete with helpful reminders about check-in times and baggage restrictions. Baggage restrictions. I almost laughed out loud right there in the gas station, surrounded by energy drinks and lottery tickets, and the smell of Roller Grill hot dogs. What baggage was I going to bring? The shirt covered in marinara sauce? The years of accumulated resentment? The wedding ring that suddenly felt like it weighed about 50 pounds? I paid for my water and walked back out to the car, phone buzzing again with another round of calls I had no intention of answering. 5 hours and 12 minutes until takeoff. Enough time to drive to the airport, park in long-term parking like I was going on a normal business trip instead of fleeing my entire life, and maybe grab some actual clothes that didn't look like they'd been used as target practice by an Italian restaurant. Sitting in the driver's seat, I looked at that boarding pass one more time. Grayson Mitchell, it said. Not Grayson Prescott adjacent. Not Marissa's disappointing husband. Not the guy who didn't quite fit in at family dinners. Just Grayson Mitchell, passenger, destination unknown. For the first time in 6 years, that felt like exactly the right name to be. You know that moment in action movies when the hero's phone starts going off like the world's most annoying alarm clock, and you just know that whatever peace and quiet they had is about to go straight to hell? Well, apparently my life had just turned into one of those movies, except instead of international spies or alien invasions, I was dealing with something far more terrifying. The collective wrath of the Prescott family. 5 minutes. 5 freaking minutes after I hit confirm purchase on that airline ticket, and my phone lit up like the 4th of July had a baby with Times Square on New Year's Eve. The thing was vibrating so hard against the dashboard that I was half worried it might achieve actual flight before I did. I'd barely pulled out of the gas station parking lot when the first wave hit. Call after call, text after text, voicemail notifications piling up faster than I could even read the names. It was like watching a social media meltdown in real time, except instead of strangers on the internet, it was my own family-in-law losing their collective minds because I'd had the audacity to leave their little performance without taking a bow. The irony wasn't lost on me that these people, who couldn't be bothered to offer me a napkin when I was sitting there covered in marinara sauce, suddenly had an urgent need to communicate now that I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. Marissa was leading the charge, naturally. Her name kept flashing on the screen like a neon sign advertising disappointment. "Where are you?" popped up in a text bubble, followed immediately by "Don't do this," and then "You're making a scene." Because apparently leaving quietly after being humiliated was somehow more dramatic than dumping hot pasta on someone's head in front of 30 people. The logic of the Prescott family, ladies and gentlemen, always consistent in its complete lack of consistency. But Marissa was just the opening act. The real show started when Tristan got involved. I could practically see him holding an ice pack to his jaw while frantically typing threats into his phone, probably feeling like the victim in all this. His messages started pouring in faster than I could delete them. "You're done," followed by, "I'll have you arrested," and my personal favorite, "You have no idea what you've started." What I'd started. Right. Because apparently throwing the first punch was dumping food on someone, and defending yourself was the real crime here. I was starting to think these people lived in some kind of alternate reality where normal cause and effect relationships had been suspended in favor of whatever narrative made them look good. Then Aunt Margot joined the party, and boy, did she come loaded for bear. Her messages read like they'd been dictated by a disappointed Victorian matriarch who'd just discovered that the servants had been using the good china. "We opened our family to you, and this is how you behave?" she wrote, as if they'd been doing me some kind of massive favor by tolerating my existence at their dinner table. "After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get?" Everything they'd done for me. Let's see. What exactly had they done for me over the past 6 years? They'd included me in family gatherings where I was either ignored or insulted. They'd made it crystal clear that I wasn't really welcome in their social circle. And they treated me like a charity case who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. Oh, and tonight they'd use me as target practice for Italian food. Truly, I was the luckiest man alive. Uncle Howard's messages were more restrained, but somehow more threatening, written in that careful corporate language that he probably used to fire people without technically breaking any labor laws. "Call me immediately," he wrote, followed by, "We need to discuss your future with this family." My future with this family. Like I was an employee whose contract was up for review instead of someone who'd married into their dysfunction. But the real kicker came from Sophie, Marissa's cousin, who apparently thought this was all some kind of entertaining family drama that she could live tweet for her friends. "OMG, everyone is so upset," she wrote, complete with crying laughing emojis. "Aunt Margot is literally shaking. Uncle Howard is pacing around talking about lawyers. This is better than reality TV. Better than reality TV." There it was, the family motto in all its glory. Real people's pain was just entertainment for them, something to spice up their otherwise boring lives of privilege and plenty. I wondered if Sophie was already planning to turn this into content for her Instagram story, maybe with some kind of inspirational quote about family loyalty overlaid on a picture of her avocado toast. The messages kept coming, a steady stream of outrage and demands and threats that painted a pretty clear picture of how the Prescott family handled anyone who dared to color outside their carefully drawn lines. They weren't worried about me as a person. Not one message asked if I was okay, or if I was hurt, or if I needed anything. They were worried about their image, their control, their ability to maintain the carefully constructed narrative where they were the generous benefactors and I was the grateful recipient of their largesse. I pulled over at a rest stop about 20 miles from the airport, partly because my phone was making it hard to concentrate on driving, and partly because I needed to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few long-haul truckers catching some sleep and a family with small kids making an emergency bathroom stop. Sitting there under the fluorescent lights of the rest stop, I started scrolling through the messages more carefully, and that's when I noticed something that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. Not a single one of them mentioned the fact that Tristan had dumped hot food on my head. Not one message said, "Hey, maybe my brother/nephew/son was out of line." Not one person suggested that pouring marinara sauce on someone might be considered inappropriate dinner behavior. It was all about my reaction, my violence, my overreaction to what they were probably already spinning as a harmless prank between family members. The actual assault, because let's call it what it was, had already been memory holed in favor of a story where I was the unstable one who couldn't take a joke. The counter on my phone showed 315 total notifications, and they were still climbing. 315 separate attempts to drag me back into their web of dysfunct. 315 reminders of why I'd bought that plane ticket in the first place. But here's what struck me as I sat there in that rest stop parking lot, surrounded by the honest exhaustion of people traveling for real reasons. Work, family visits, moving across the country for new jobs. These messages weren't from people who cared about me. They were from people who cared about maintaining their version of reality, where they could treat people however they wanted and never face any consequences. Not one message said, "Are you okay?" Not one person asked if the sauce had burned my skin or if I needed medical attention. Not one member of Marissa's family seemed to think that maybe, just maybe, they should be apologizing to me instead of demanding that I apologize to them. I looked at that growing pile of digital outrage, all those words and threats and demands, and realized something that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't owe these people anything. Not an explanation, not an apology, not even a response. So I did something that felt better than any comeback I could have written, better than any angry phone call I could have made, better than any dramatic confrontation I could have staged. I turned off my phone and put it in my bag, cutting off their access to me as simply as flipping a switch. The silence that followed was more satisfying than any argument I'd ever won. You know how people always say that airplane air is recycled and gross and makes you feel like you're breathing through a dirty sock? Well, let me tell you something. After 6 years of breathing the suffocating atmosphere of Prescott family expectations, that recycled airplane air tasted like pure freedom with a hint of peanuts and possibility. The red-eye flight to Honolulu had been exactly what I'd needed. 5.5 hours of enforced silence with nothing but the hum of engines and the occasional snore from the businessman in 24B. No phone calls, No text messages, no family members trying to drag me back into their twisted version of reality. Just me, a tiny bag of pretzels, and the growing realization that I'd actually done it. I'd bought a one-way ticket to anywhere but here and followed through. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for that first breath of Hawaiian air. The plane doors opened, and it hit me like a warm hug from a grandmother you didn't know you had. Not the aggressive, in-your-face heat that makes you want to run back inside to air conditioning, but this soft, gentle warmth that seemed to wrap around you like the world's most expensive blanket. It was air with personality, air that smelled like flowers you couldn't name and ocean salt, and something that might have been happiness if happiness had a scent. I walked down that jet bridge feeling like I was entering a different universe entirely. The terminal at Honolulu International wasn't trying to impress anyone with marble floors or crystal chandeliers like the airports back home. Instead, it had this laid-back, "Hey, welcome to paradise, try not to stress about anything" vibe that immediately made my shoulders drop about 3 inches. Hawaiian music was playing softly through speakers that didn't sound like they were trying to compete with the noise of stressed-out travelers, and everywhere I looked, people seemed to be moving just a little bit slower, a little bit easier, like they'd all collectively agreed that rushing around was probably not the best way to spend their time on Earth. The baggage claim was where it really hit me that I'd made a completely insane decision. Everyone else was standing around waiting for their carefully packed suitcases full of vacation clothes and sunscreen and all the things normal people bring when they plan a trip to Hawaii. Meanwhile, I was standing there with nothing but my wallet, my passport, and a single backpack that contained exactly one change of underwear and the business card for a divorce lawyer that I'd been carrying around for 2 years but never had the guts to call. That's when I realized I was going to need somewhere to stay, and probably some clothes that didn't smell like marinara sauce and poor life choices. I pulled out my phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on once the plane landed, and started scrolling through Airbnb listings, trying to find something that said, "Yes, we welcome people who've just blown up their entire lives on a whim." Most of the listings looked like they'd been photographed by people who'd taken a masterclass in making small spaces look like luxury resorts. Lots of carefully staged photos with perfectly placed pineapples and artfully rumpled white linens that probably cost more per night than I made in a week. But then I found one that was different. The photos were clearly taken by someone who'd just pointed their phone at stuff and clicked. No fancy lighting or strategic fruit placement. Just a small beachfront place with weathered wooden furniture and windows that actually looked like they opened to let in real air instead of Instagram-worthy filtered light. The description was written by someone named Kimo, and it simply said, "Clean, quiet, close to beach. Good for people who want to think or people who want to stop thinking. Your choice." Perfect. I booked it for a week, which felt like either the most reasonable decision I'd made in years or the most irresponsible, depending on how you looked at it. The address led me to a taxi driven by a guy who introduced himself as Paolo and immediately started telling me about his cousin's shrimp truck that I absolutely had to try, his nephew's surf lessons that would change my life, and his grandmother's secret spot for watching sunsets that wasn't overrun with tourists taking selfies. The ride to the Airbnb was like a guided tour through everything I'd been missing while I was busy trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. We passed beaches where people were actually playing in the water instead of posing next to it, restaurants that looked like they'd been built by people who cared more about the food than the Instagram potential, and neighborhoods where kids were riding bikes and old men were playing chess in parks, and life seemed to be happening at a pace that actually made sense for human beings. You running away from something or running to something? Paolo asked as we pulled up to a small house that looked like it had been painted by someone who believed that blue should actually look like the ocean and green should actually look like plants. "Little bit of both," I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in months. He nodded like this made perfect sense. Hawaii's good for that. The islands don't judge. They just let you figure out what you need to figure out. The house was exactly what the photos had promised. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable, and so close to the beach that I could hear the waves from the front porch. There was a small kitchen with everything you needed to make actual food, a living room with furniture that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than style, and a bedroom with windows that opened wide enough to let in the sound of the ocean. But the real revelation came when I met Kimo himself. I'd been expecting someone who'd been polished by years of dealing with tourists, someone who'd learned to smile on command and recommend overpriced restaurants. Instead, I got a guy in his 50s with hands that looked like they'd actually worked for a living and a laugh that sounded like it came from somewhere deep and genuine. "First time in Hawaii?" he asked, and when I nodded, he grinned. "Good. The island's got a way of showing you things you didn't know you needed to see. You here for business or pleasure?" "Honestly," I said, setting down my pathetic backpack in a living room that somehow felt more like home than any place I'd lived in the past 6 years. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm here for." Kimo's laugh filled the space like warm honey. "Even better. That means you're here for the right reasons." He handed me the keys and a handshake that felt like he actually meant it, like I was a person worth welcoming instead of a problem to be managed. "The ocean's right out that door," he said, pointing toward the back of the house. "Don't overthink it. Just go look at it for a while. The water's got a way of putting things in perspective." So that's what I did. I walked out to the beach behind the house, kicked off my shoes that still smelled faintly of family reunion disaster, and stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean while the sun started its descent toward the horizon. For the first time in 6 years, nobody was telling me where to stand, how to act, or what to say. The waves didn't care about my family connections, my social status, or whether I belonged anywhere in particular. They just kept rolling in, one after another, like they had all the time in the world. Turns out when you're not spending every waking moment trying to decode the complex social dynamics of people who think you're beneath them, you have a surprising amount of time to figure out what you actually enjoy doing. Who knew? My first week in Hawaii developed a rhythm that felt so natural I started wondering if this was what normal people meant when they talked about work-life balance, instead of work-life complete psychological warfare. I'd wake up when my body felt like waking up, not because an alarm was screaming at me to get ready for another day of disappointment. And I'd walk out to the beach to watch the sunrise paint the sky in colors that didn't exist in the Prescott family palette. The mornings were the best part. There's something about being the only person on a beach at 6 a.m. that makes you feel like you've discovered a secret that the rest of the world hasn't figured out yet. The sand was cool under my bare feet. The water was this impossible shade of blue that made you wonder why anyone ever settled for swimming pools. And the air tasted like possibilities that didn't come with strings attached or family approval ratings. I'd walk for miles, picking up shells that nobody expected me to display properly or appreciate appropriately, watching crabs scuttle around like they had important business to attend to, and generally enjoying the novel experience of existing without constantly calculating how my behavior might reflect on the family name. After the beach walks came coffee and breakfast at this little cafe called Sunrise Shack that looked like it had been built by surfers who'd accidentally become excellent at making food. The owner, a woman named Keiko who had to be pushing 70 but moved like she was half that age, made coffee that could wake the dead and acai bowls that tasted like someone had figured out how to turn tropical paradise into breakfast. "You're the mainland guy staying at Kimo's place," she said on my third morning, not really asking. Island communities, I was learning, had their own communication networks that made social media look sluggish. "Guilty as charged," I said, wondering if being the mainland guy was going to come with its own set of expectations and requirements. "Good," she said, sliding a plate of fresh fruit across the counter. "Kimo says you look like you needed to get lost for a while. Hawaii's perfect for that. Getting lost. I like that way of thinking about it better than running away, or having a midlife crisis, or whatever psychological label the Prescott family was probably attaching to my disappearance. Getting lost implied that you might eventually find something, whereas running away suggested you were just a coward who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. The afternoons were for reading. I discovered that when you're not constantly stressed about family dinner performances or social obligations that felt like pop quizzes you hadn't studied for, you could actually concentrate on books for more than 10 minutes at a time. I'd grab something from the little bookstore in town, a place that clearly existed because the owner loved books, not because she'd calculated the optimal profit margins on literary fiction, and find a spot on the beach or at one of the outdoor cafes where nobody cared if you sat there for 3 hours nursing a single iced tea. It was at one of these cafes, a place called The Grind that had mismatched chairs and Wi-Fi that worked about 60% of the time, that I met Lonnie. She was at the table next to mine, hunched over a laptop and muttering things that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary about website design platforms. "You okay over there?" I asked after she'd called her computer something that would have made Aunt Margot clutch her pearls so hard she'd probably need medical attention. "Oh, I'm fantastic," she said, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to fill a swimming pool. "Just trying to update my shop's website, and this piece of garbage platform is acting like I asked it to solve world hunger instead of add a simple photo gallery." Lonnie, as it turned out, ran a surf shop called Wave Rider that had been in her family for 20 years. She was about my age, with sun-bleached hair and hands that looked like they'd spent a lot of time fixing things, and she had absolutely zero patience for technology that didn't work the way it was supposed to. "What kind of shop?" I asked, closing my book because this conversation was infinitely more interesting than whatever literary masterpiece I'd been pretending to read. "Surf shop. Boards, gear, lessons for tourists who think they're going to become the next Kelly Slater after a 2-hour session." She gestured at her laptop screen like it had personally offended her ancestors. "We do pretty well, but our website looks like it was designed in 1995 by someone who'd never seen the internet before." Here's where things got interesting. Back in my previous life, the one where I spent most of my time trying to disappear into furniture at family gatherings, I'd actually been pretty good at website design. It was something I'd picked up in college and kept doing on the side, mostly for small businesses that couldn't afford the big fancy agencies that charged more for a logo than most people made in a month. "I might be able to help with that," I said, surprised to hear myself volunteering for something without first calculating how it might affect my standing with people I was trying to impress. Lonnie looked up from her laptop, squinting at me like she was trying to figure out if I was serious or just another mainland tourist who thought he could solve all of Hawaii's problems with his superior continental wisdom. "You know anything about websites?" she asked. "A little," I said, which was probably the most understated thing I'd said since arriving in paradise. "Mind if I take a look?" What followed was the most fun I'd had working on anything in years. Lonnie's existing website was indeed a disaster of epic proportions. Broken links, photos that loaded sideways, and a color scheme that looked like it had been chosen by someone who'd never seen an actual ocean. But it wasn't unfixable, just neglected. We spent the next 3 hours completely rebuilding the thing from scratch. Lonnie provided the content and the vision. She knew exactly what her customers needed and how they thought, while I handled the technical stuff that made her want to throw her laptop into the nearest volcano. "You want clean, simple, easy to navigate," I said, pulling up examples of sites that actually worked. "Nothing fancy, just functional. People want to see your boards, check your lesson schedules, maybe read some reviews from happy customers." "Exactly," she said, and I realized it had been months since someone had responded to one of my ideas with genuine enthusiasm instead of polite tolerance or outright dismissal. By the time we finished, Wave Rider had a website that actually looked like it belonged to a business that knew what it was doing. The photos loaded properly, the navigation made sense, and the whole thing had a clean, professional look that still felt relaxed and welcoming. "How much do I owe you?" Lonnie asked as we tested the final version on her phone. "Nothing," I said, surprising myself again. It was fun. Fun. She looked at me like I'd just claimed that root canals were my favorite hobby. "You think website design is fun? When it's not for people who treat you like their personal tech support slave." "Yeah, it's actually pretty enjoyable." That's when she made me an offer that would change everything. I've got a couple of friends who run businesses around here. They're all dealing with the same kind of website disasters. If you're interested in picking up some side work while you're getting lost, I could put in some good words. Side work. Not charity, not family obligations, not doing favors for people who'd never return them. Actual work that I'd chosen to do, for people who appreciated it, at my own pace and on my own terms. Sitting there at that mismatched table, watching the sun start its descent toward the horizon while Lonnie scrolled through her new website with obvious satisfaction, I realized something that should have been obvious but somehow felt revolutionary. This was the first time in years that I'd done work that felt like it belonged to me. Not work that I did to impress my in-laws, not projects designed to boost my standing in some social hierarchy I'd never signed up for, but actual work that solved real problems for real people who treated me like a human being instead of a convenient disappointment. "Yeah," I said, watching a couple of surfers paddle out to catch the evening waves. I think I'd like that. 2 weeks in paradise had done something weird to my relationship with technology. Back in my old life, my phone was basically a digital leash that kept me connected to every disappointment, obligation, and passive-aggressive family text thread that made up my daily existence. Here in Hawaii, the thing had been sitting in a drawer like a piece of radioactive waste that I was pretty sure would kill me if I got too close to it. But eventually, reality has a way of knocking on your door, even when that door happens to be attached to a beachfront bungalow in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. My phone battery had finally died sometime during week 1, and I'd been perfectly content to let it stay that way. Dead phones can't deliver bad news, can't remind you of the life you left behind, and can't buzz with notifications from people who think you owe them explanations for your own happiness. Unfortunately, they also can't be used to run a business, and Lonnie's referrals were starting to pile up faster than I could handle with just her laptop and the questionable Wi-Fi at the grind. 3 local businesses wanted website overhauls, 2 needed complete e-commerce setups, and a local artist wanted an online gallery that didn't look like it had been designed by someone who'd learned HTML from a cereal box. So there I was, standing in the little electronics shop in downtown Honolulu, holding a phone charger and trying to work up the courage to plug my phone back into the world I'd left behind. The shop owner, a guy named Dave who looked like he'd been selling electronics since before smartphones were even a twinkle in Steve Jobs' eye, was watching me stare at the charger like it might explode. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look like you're about to defuse a bomb instead of charge a phone." "Something like that," I said, handing him a 20 and wondering if there was any way to SE. Back at the bungalow, I plugged the thing in and watched it slowly come back to life with all the enthusiasm of someone waiting for their STD test results. The Apple logo appeared, followed by the home screen, followed by the most ridiculous notification badge I'd ever seen in my life. 347 unread messages. 347. I sat there on Chemo's comfortable old couch, listening to the waves crash outside, and watching that number blink at me like a neon sign advertising everything I'd been successfully avoiding for the past 2 weeks. Part of me wanted to throw the phone right back in the drawer and pretend I'd never seen it. Part of me was curious about just how deep the rabbit hole of family outrage had gotten in my absence. Curiosity won, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. The voicemail box was completely full, 37 messages that I was pretty sure would contain enough guilt, manipulation, and threats to power a small city. I started with those, figuring I might as well get the worst of it over with first. Marissa's voice hit me like a cold slap of reality. The first few messages were angry, really angry. "Where the hell are you, Grayson? You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. Call me back immediately." Her voice had that sharp edge it got when she was trying to control something that wasn't cooperating, like a broken appliance or a husband who'd finally grown a backbone. But as the messages progressed, the anger shifted to something that was almost worse, strategic crying. By message number 12, she was sobbing into the phone about how worried she was, how she just wanted to know I was safe, how we could work through this if I'd just come home and talk to her like a reasonable adult. "I know you're hurt," she said in one message that was clearly performed for an audience. "I know things got out of hand at the reunion, but running away isn't the answer, Grayson. We're married. We made vows. You can't just abandon everything because you had a fight with my brother." A fight with her brother. Right. Because that's what you call it when someone dumps hot food on your head and you defend yourself. A little disagreement between boys, nothing that couldn't be solved with a firm handshake and maybe a nice bottle of wine. Tristan's messages were exactly what you'd expect from someone whose jaw I'd rearranged with my fist. The first few were pure rage, promising legal action and making threats that probably would have scared me if I'd still been living in his world of consequences and social standings. "You're finished," he snarled in one particularly charming voicemail. "I'm going to destroy you. You'll never work in this town again. Never work in this town again." Like I was some kind of mob movie character instead of a guy who designed websites and had finally gotten tired of being treated like furniture. I almost laughed out loud at that one, sitting there in my beach bungalow with more work than I could handle and zero interest in whatever town he thought he controlled. But the later messages from Tristan were different, more calculated. "Look," he said in what was clearly meant to be his reasonable voice. "Maybe we both got a little heated. Why don't you come back and we'll talk this through like adults? Marissa's worried sick, and the family thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Some kind of breakdown. Translation: they decided I was mentally unstable, which was probably easier for them to accept than the possibility that their behavior had finally pushed someone past their breaking point. Uncle Howard's messages were all business, delivered in that smooth corporate tone that said he was used to fixing problems with money and influence. Grayson, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing the family, and more importantly, you're hurting Marissa. I think we can find a way to make this work for everyone. Call me back, and we'll discuss your options. My options? Like I was an employee being offered a severance package instead of a person who'd finally decided to prioritize my own sanity over their dysfunctional family dynamics. Aunt Margot's messages were pure psychological warfare, listing every opportunity I was throwing away by behaving like an ungrateful child. We had plans for you, she said in one particularly manipulative voicemail. Howard was going to bring you into the business. We were going to help you build something real. But you've shown your true colors now, haven't you? Plans for me. Help me build something real. As if their version of my life was somehow more legitimate than whatever I might choose for myself. As if success could only be measured by how well I fit into their predetermined mold of what a proper Prescott family member should look like. But the real kicker came from Sophie, who'd apparently appointed herself the family's social media correspondent. Her messages were breathless updates on the family drama, delivered like she was reporting from the front lines of a particularly juicy reality show. Everyone's talking about you, she said in one message that was equal parts excited and horrified. Aunt Margot thinks you've joined a cult or something. Uncle Howard keeps muttering about hiring a private investigator. And Marissa? Oh my God, Marissa is acting like you died or something. She's telling everyone you're having a nervous breakdown. A nervous breakdown. There it was again, the family's preferred explanation for my sudden departure. Much easier to accept than the possibility that their golden boy had crossed a line and finally faced consequences for it. I scrolled through the text messages, which were more of the same. Guilt, manipulation, threats, and a stunning lack of self-awareness about what had actually happened that night. Not one message acknowledged that Tristan had assaulted me. Not one person suggested that maybe, just maybe, dumping hot food on someone wasn't appropriate family fun. It was all about my reaction, my over-response, my inability to take a joke and play along with their twisted version of family bonding. But here's what struck me as I sat there in that peaceful bungalow, listening to the sound of waves and feeling the warm Hawaiian breeze through the open windows. Their anger wasn't really about me leaving. It was about me leaving without permission, without explanation, without giving them the chance to control the narrative and manage the situation according to their preferred script. They weren't upset because they'd lost me. They were upset because they'd lost control of me. And that realization felt better than any apology they could have offered, better than any explanation they could have given, better than any attempt to make things right. I deleted every single message without responding to a single one. No explanations, no justifications, no carefully worded emails trying to make them understand my perspective. Just silence. The kind of silence that says more than any argument ever could. You know what's funny about making a decision that everyone back home thinks is completely insane? Eventually, you stop caring whether they think it's insane or not, and you start focusing on whether it's actually working out for you. And let me tell you, 3 weeks into my Hawaiian adventure, things were working out better than I had any right to expect. The website work that had started with helping Lonnie had turned into something that looked suspiciously like an actual business. Word travels fast in island communities, especially when that word is mainland guy who can make your crappy website stop sucking without charging you a fortune. My phone, the same phone that had been buzzing with family drama and threats just a week ago, was now ringing with calls from local business owners who had actual problems they wanted me to solve. There was Maria, who ran a food truck called Island Fusion and needed an online ordering system that didn't crash every time more than 3 people tried to use it simultaneously. There was Tommy, a fishing charter captain whose website looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen a boat, let alone been on one. And there was Elena, who made jewelry from beach glass and shells and wanted an e-commerce site that captured the spirit of her work without looking like every other generic craft store on the internet. Real work for real people with real problems. It was a revelation that probably shouldn't have been as surprising as it was, but after years of doing favors for Marissa's family connections, People who treated web design like some kind of mysterious voodoo and expected miracles while complaining about every invoice. Working with folks who actually appreciated what I was doing felt like discovering a new planet. The best part was that nobody here knew about my previous life as the family disappointment. To Maria, I was just the guy who fixed her website so customers could actually place orders without wanting to throw their phones into the ocean. To Tommy, I was the computer wizard who made his charter business look professional enough to compete with the big resort operations. To Elena, I was the person who figured out how to make her art look as beautiful online as it did in real life. None of them cared that I'd never been good enough for the Prescott family standards. None of them expected me to apologize for existing or to constantly prove that I deserved to breathe the same air as my social betters. They just wanted someone who could solve their problems without talking down to them or charging them like they were funding a space mission. The work was good, but the real breakthrough came on Friday evenings at the pier with Chemo. It had started accidentally. I'd been walking along the waterfront around sunset, trying to clear my head after a long day of coding, when I'd spotted him sitting on a bench with a cooler full of beer and a smile that could power the whole island. "Mainland guy," he'd called out, waving me over like we'd been friends for decades instead of casual acquaintances who'd exchanged maybe 50 words total. Perfect timing. I was just about to watch the sun do its thing, and beer always tastes better when you've got someone to share it with. That first Friday had turned into a weekly tradition that I looked forward to more than I'd looked forward to anything in years. Chemo had this way of talking that made everything seem both completely serious and totally relaxed at the same time. He'd worked construction for 30 years, raised 3 kids who were all doing well for themselves, and had opinions about everything from local politics to the best way to grill fish that were both informed and completely unpretentious. "You settling in okay?" he asked during our 3rd beer summit, watching a cruise ship slide past the harbor like a floating city of tourists who'd probably never see the real Hawaii. "Better than okay," I said, surprised to realize how true that was. "This place is starting to feel like home." "Good," he nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. "Hawaii's got a way of calling to people who need it. Not everyone hears it, but when you do, you know." We'd sit there watching the sun paint the sky in colors that didn't exist in any of the fancy art galleries the Prescott family liked to frequent, talking about everything and nothing while fishing boats headed out for the night shift and joggers made their evening rounds along the waterfront. Sometimes we'd talk about work. Chemo was full of stories about construction projects that had gone hilariously wrong and clients who'd made requests that defied both physics and common sense. Sometimes we'd talk about family, his kids, his grandkids, his wife who'd passed away 5 years ago, and who he still missed every single day. But mostly, we'd just exist in the same space without any pressure to perform or impress or justify our presence. It was the kind of friendship that developed naturally, based on mutual enjoyment of each other's company rather than social obligation or family connection, or any of the complicated dynamics that had governed most of my relationships back in my previous life. "You ever miss it?" he asked one evening, gesturing vaguely in the direction of what I assumed was the mainland. "Whatever you left behind to end up here?" I thought about that question longer than I probably needed to. Did I miss anything about my old life? The house that had never really felt like mine? The family gatherings where I was tolerated rather than welcomed? The constant feeling that I was failing some test that nobody had bothered to explain to me? "I miss the idea of it," I said finally. "I miss thinking that I had a place where I belonged, even if that place never actually existed." Chemo nodded like this made perfect sense. That's the difference between missing something real and missing something you wished was real. One's worth going back for, the other's just nostalgia for a life you never actually had. The more time I spent in Hawaii, the more I realized he was right. I wasn't homesick for my actual life. I was homesick for the version of my life that had never existed outside my own hopeful imagination. The version where Marissa's family accepted me as an equal, where Tristan treated me like a brother instead of a target, where I fit into their world without having to shrink myself down to accommodate their expectations. But that version had never been real, and pretending it might someday become real had cost me years of actual happiness in favor of hypothetical approval from people who'd never actually intended to give it. The island routine was healing something in me that I hadn't even realized was broken. Morning walks on the beach where nobody expected me to network or make small talk about my career prospects. Afternoons working on projects that people actually appreciated instead of endured. Evenings watching sunsets with a friend who liked me exactly as I was instead of constantly hinting at ways I could improve myself to better fit his social circle. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I was living a life that felt like it belonged to me instead of everyone else. The work I was doing was work I'd chosen, for people I genuinely liked, at a pace that felt sustainable instead of frantic. The friendships I was building were based on mutual respect and shared interests instead of family obligation or social climbing. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was sitting in that gas station 3 weeks ago, buying a one-way ticket to anywhere that wasn't where I'd been. But it was a life that fit me in ways that my carefully constructed previous existence never had. And for the first time since I could remember, I was excited about tomorrow instead of dreading it. 3 months. 93 days since I'd walked out of that barn-style reunion hall covered in marinara sauce and bruised dignity, and I was sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Honolulu, signing papers that would officially end the longest mistake of my adult life. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Kim who had the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that made you understand why she'd built a successful practice, slid the final divorce papers across her desk with a smile that suggested she'd seen this particular brand of liberation many times before. "Congratulations," she said, as I signed my name on the last page. "You're officially a free man." Free man. The words hit me differently than I'd expected. Not with relief, exactly, and definitely not with regret, but with something that felt like possibility wrapped in acceptance. I was free, but more importantly, I was free by choice rather than circumstance. I'd chosen this path, step by step, decision by decision. From that first moment, I decided not to apologize for defending myself to this final signature that severed the last legal tie to a life that had never really fit. The apartment above Lonnie's surf shop had become available 2 weeks ago when the previous tenant, a yoga instructor named Rainbow, who was probably born with a much more conventional name, had decided to follow her chakras to Sedona or some other place where people took spiritual guidance from crystals seriously. Lonnie had offered me the space before it even hit the market, which was either a sign of friendship or a practical business decision based on the fact that I'd already fixed her computer system 3 times and installed a security camera that actually worked. Either way, I'd jumped on it faster than a tourist jumping away from a Portuguese man of war. The place was small. Basically a studio with a kitchen alcove and a bathroom that required some creative maneuvering, but it had windows that opened wide enough to let in the constant sound of waves and a view of the ocean that made every morning feel like a vacation commercial. Moving in had been the easiest relocation of my life, mainly because I owned exactly 3 suitcases worth of stuff and had developed a deep appreciation for the minimalist lifestyle. No family heirlooms to worry about. No furniture that came with emotional baggage. No wedding photos to pack away in boxes labeled, "Deal with this later." Just clothes, a laptop, some books, and a coffee maker that had become my most prized possession after discovering that Island Time included a much more relaxed approach to caffeine availability. The business had grown beyond anything I'd expected when I first helped Lonnie with her website disaster. Word of mouth in island communities travels faster than gossip at a high school reunion. And apparently, mainland guy who actually knows what he's doing and doesn't treat you like an idiot was a rare enough commodity to keep me busier than I'd ever been in my previous life. I had a steady stream of clients ranging from local restaurants to tour operators to artists who made everything from custom surfboards to jewelry that looked like the ocean had personally designed it. But the real revelation was that I was making more money doing work I actually enjoyed than I'd ever made trying to impress people who would never be impressed anyway. Turns out that when you're genuinely good at something and you work with people who appreciate what you do, the financial part tends to sort itself out without requiring family connections or social networking events that felt like endurance tests. The apartment came with a small desk that fit perfectly under the main window, positioned so I could look up from my laptop and watch surfers catching waves while I worked on whatever project was currently demanding my attention. Today it was a complete e-commerce overhaul for a local coffee roaster who'd been trying to sell his beans online using a system that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard about the internet, but never actually seen it. The ocean breeze carried through the open windows, rustling the curtains I bought at a local market from a woman who'd spent 20 minutes telling me about the traditional Hawaiian patterns while her granddaughter taught me how to pronounce mahalo correctly. It was the kind of interruption that would have driven me crazy in my old life, where every minute was scheduled and every interaction was measured against its potential value to my social standing. Here, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Buying curtains from someone who cared about the history behind the patterns, learning a word that meant more than just thank you in a language that belonged to this place I was slowly becoming part of. My phone, which had become a tool for actual work instead of a device for delivering family drama, buzzed with a text from Chemo, Sunset Beer Summit in 1 hour. Tommy caught some Ono today, and Elena's bringing her famous mac salad. You in? I looked at my laptop screen, where about 3 hours of work remained on the coffee roaster's website, and realized something that would have shocked my former self. The work could wait. Not because I was lazy or irresponsible, but because I'd learned the difference between urgent and important, between other people's expectations and my own priorities. The website would get finished, the client would be happy, and the world would continue spinning without requiring me to sacrifice every moment of personal time on the altar of productivity. Definitely in. I texted back, closing the laptop and walking to the small closet where I kept the kind of clothes that prioritized comfort over appearance. Board shorts, t-shirts that had never seen an iron, and flip-flops that cost less than the socks I used to wear to family dinners. Walking down to the beach where our informal Friday group had started gathering, I passed the mirror that came with the apartment and caught a glimpse of someone I barely recognized. Tan from spending actual time outdoors instead of commuting between air-conditioned buildings. Relaxed in a way that went deeper than just the absence of stress. Happy, which was such a foreign concept that it had taken me weeks to identify the emotion correctly. The beach was already occupied by the usual suspects. Chemo with his cooler of beer and infinite supply of stories about construction mishaps. Tommy cleaning fish with the kind of expertise that comes from 40 years of knowing exactly how sharp your knife needs to be. Elena arranging food on a folding table like she was setting up for a photo shoot. And Lonnie emerging from her shop with a bag of ice and a grin that suggested she'd just closed a deal with some tourists who thought they were going to become professional surfers after one lesson. Mainland guy, Chemo called out, using the nickname that had somehow evolved from identifying description to term of endearment. Perfect timing. Tommy just finished telling us about the time he accidentally caught a monk seal and had to explain to the Coast Guard why he was hugging a federally protected species. This was my life now. Friday evening fish and beer with people who'd become family not through marriage or blood or social obligation, but through the simple process of choosing to show up for each other week after week. No dress code, no hidden agendas, no complex dynamics that required a decoder ring and a sociology degree to navigate. Just people who liked each other, sharing food and stories while the sun painted the sky in colors that never got old, no matter how many times you watched the show. I grabbed a beer from Chemo's cooler and settled into the sand, feeling the warmth that lingered from the day's sunshine and listening to Elena describe her latest jewelry project, while Tommy argued with Lonnie about the best bait for certain types of fish and Chemo planned his next home improvement disaster. Somewhere on the mainland, my former in-laws were probably still discussing my disappearance, still trying to figure out how to spin my departure into a story that made them look like the victims. Marissa had probably moved on, found someone more suitable to the family standards, someone who understood the importance of proper behavior at social gatherings and never confused self-respect with selfishness. And for the first time since I'd known any of them, I genuinely hoped they were happy. Not because I missed them or wanted to reconcile, but because their happiness was no longer connected to mine. They could live their lives according to their values, and I could live mine according to mine, and neither of us had to apologize for the incompatibility. The sun touched the horizon, turning the ocean into a mirror that reflected possibilities I was still discovering. Tomorrow I'd finish the coffee website, start planning a new project for a local artist, maybe take Lonnie up on her offer to teach me how to surf without embarrassing myself in front of the tourists. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, with people who liked me exactly as I was, in a place that felt like home in ways I'd never experienced before. The spaghetti incident seemed like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Not because I'd forgotten it, but because it had become the beginning of something better instead of the end of something that had never really worked anyway. Hawaii wasn't just the place I'd escaped to. It was the place I'd finally remembered who I was supposed to be all along. I've never been the kind of guy who expects the world to stop spinning just for me. Life's been good enough, steady job, decent house, a family that gets by. But turning 40? That felt different. For weeks, Brielle kept dropping these little hints, her voice all playful and mysterious, saying, "Just wait, Julian. Something big is coming." I'd catch her smiling at me over breakfast, her brown eyes sparkling like she was hiding a secret she couldn't wait to spill. Skylar, my 19-year-old daughter, would nudge me at the dinner table and ask weird questions like, "Dad, what's your favorite cake flavor?" Maddox, my 21-year-old son, even checked my work schedule, asking what days I'd be off. I'm a construction supervisor, so my hours are long, but I started thinking maybe they were planning something. A surprise party, maybe? A nice dinner out? I didn't need much, just a little sign they cared. I let myself hope, you know? I let that tiny spark grow in my chest as my birthday got closer. I'd come home from work, tired and dusty, picturing balloons or a happy birthday banner taped to the living room wall. So, on the big day, March 29th, 2025, I pulled my truck into the driveway, my heart beating a little faster than usual. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange, and I sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel, telling myself not to get too excited. I grabbed my lunchbox and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots as I walked up to the front door. I turned the key, pushed it open, and nothing. The house was dark, silent, empty. No warm smell of food hit me. No laughter or footsteps rushing to greet me. The living room stretched out in front of me, bare, no decorations, no candles, no nothing. I flicked on the light, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise." But the switch just buzzed, and the bulb hummed to life, showing me the truth. The couch sat there, same as always. The TV was off. The kitchen counter was clean. No cake, no plates, no mess of a party being prepped. I dropped my lunchbox on the table, the thud echoing in the quiet, and stood there, staring at the empty space where my family should have been. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. No texts, no calls, no, "Hey, we're running late." I walked through the house, my work boots leaving faint dirt marks on the hardwood. Upstairs, the beds were made. Skylar's room smelled like her lavender spray, but her backpack was gone. Maddox's sneakers weren't by the door. Brielle's purse, the one she always leaves on the hall table, wasn't there. I checked the garage, her car was missing. My stomach twisted, heavy and sour, like I'd swallowed a rock. I told myself maybe they were out getting something last minute. Maybe they'd pull in any second, headlights flashing, full of apologies and excuses. I sat on the couch, still in my dusty jacket, and waited. 5 minutes turned into 10. 10 turned into 30. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before, each second slicing into that dumb hope I'd been carrying. I leaned back, rubbed my face, and felt the weight of 40 years settle on me. Not the milestone I'd imagined, but something else. Something cold. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped it open, and took a long sip, the bitter taste matching the ache starting to spread in my chest. They weren't coming. I knew it then, deep down, even if I didn't want to admit it. I'd spent weeks building up this moment in my head, picturing their faces, their voices, some kind of celebration to mark me hitting the big 4-0. But the house stayed quiet, and that silence told me everything. I wasn't worth the effort. Not to them. I set the beer down, my hand shaking just a little, and stared at the blank TV screen. My reflection staring back, tired eyes, gray creeping into my beard, a guy who thought he mattered. 40 years old, and this was it. An empty house, a warm beer, and a family that didn't even leave a note. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact they forgot or the fact I'd let myself believe they wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't moving from that couch. Not yet. I'd wait a little longer, just in case. But that spark? It was gone. Snuffed out by the dark, quiet truth of my birthday night. 3 hours after I sat down on that couch, the beer was warm in my hand, and the house was still as empty as a ghost town. I'd been staring at the wall, trying to figure out what I did wrong, why nobody bothered to even call. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen black, mocking me with its silence. I checked it a dozen times, nothing. No missed calls, no texts, just the same old lock screen of me and Brielle from last summer, smiling at some barbecue. I didn't want to feel sorry for myself, but damn, it was hard not to. 40 years old, and this was my big day? I grabbed my phone again, more out of habit than hope, and opened Instagram. I don't usually scroll much, too many ads and fake smiles, but something told me to look. And there it was, staring me in the face like a punch to the gut. A photo of Brielle, Skylar, Maddox, and her parents, Greg and Rochelle, all grinning on a beach. White sand stretched out behind them, waves crashing in, the sun setting all golden and perfect. Brielle had a cocktail in her hand, her sunglasses pushed up on her head, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Skylar was splashing in the water, her hair wet and wild. Maddox stood there, shirt off, holding a beer, smirking at the camera. Greg and Rochelle were lounging in chairs, looking smug as ever. The caption under Maddox's post hit me like a brick. "He won't even notice we're gone, LOL." I read it again, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. My own son wrote that. My family, my whole damn family, was at some fancy resort, living it up, while I sat here in the dark. And they thought it was funny. I scrolled through more posts. Skylar had a story up, her sipping a drink with a little umbrella, tagging some place called Paradise Cove Resort. Brielle posted a selfie with Rochelle, captioned, "Family time is the best time. Family time. Without me." I dropped the phone on the couch like it burned me and stood up, my legs shaky. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing it, and my hands clenched into fists. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, the good stuff Brielle got me for Christmas, and poured a glass. No ice, no mixer, just straight. I took a big gulp, the burn sliding down my throat, and leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. They didn't forget. That's what got me. This wasn't some accident, some last-minute thing where they meant to call but didn't. They planned this. They packed bags, got on a plane, and left me behind, laughing about it like I was some joke. I pictured them at the airport, checking in, probably saying stuff like, "Oh, Julian's fine, he's always working anyway." I took another sip, slower this time, letting it sit on my tongue. The house felt bigger than ever, the silence pressing in from every corner. I walked back to the couch, whiskey in hand, and picked up the phone again. I zoomed in on the photo, Maddox's stupid grin, Skylar's carefree wave, Brielle's easy laugh. They looked happy, happier than they ever did here with me. I set the glass down and rubbed my eyes, feeling the sting of something I wouldn't call tears, not yet. I wanted to text them. I wanted to call and yell, "What the hell is this? It's my birthday." But I didn't. What would I even say? Come home? Explain? They just laugh more, or worse, feel sorry for me. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their excuses. I scrolled back to Maddox's caption, "He won't even notice we're gone, LOL," and it played over and over in my head like a bad song. He was wrong, though. I noticed. I noticed every second of it. The whiskey bottle sat there, half empty now, and I poured another glass, my hands steadier this time. I wasn't mad, not the loud, yelling kind of mad. It was quieter, deeper, like a fire starting low in my gut. They thought I wouldn't care. They thought I'd just shrug and go to bed like nothing happened. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I took a sip, leaned back, and let the silence wrap around me. They were wrong about me, and I'd make sure they knew it. Not tonight, though. Tonight, I'd sit here, drink my whiskey, and let that fire grow. Tomorrow? That was another story. The whiskey bottle was nearly empty by the time I decided sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't enough. It was past midnight, my birthday officially over, and the house still echoed with that hollow silence. I wasn't drunk, not really, just buzzed enough to feel the edges of my anger sharpen. Maddox's caption kept bouncing around in my head. "He won't even notice we're gone, LOL." They thought I was blind, some dumb workhorse who'd just keep plodding along, too busy or too stupid to see what they were doing. But I saw it all now, clear as day, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, flipped it open, and started digging. First, I went back to Instagram, saving every post and story they'd put up, Brielle's selfies, Skylar's beach videos, Maddox's smug little updates. I took screenshots, noting the timestamps. They'd been gone at least 2 days, maybe more, based on the resort's check-in pics. Then I pulled up our joint bank account online. I'm the one who usually handles the bills, keeps the numbers straight, so I knew exactly where to look. My stomach dropped when I saw it. A $3,800 withdrawal, dated 3 days ago. Cash, not a card swipe, sneaky, like they didn't want a trail. I leaned back, rubbing my jaw, thinking about how I'd just given Maddox the same amount last month for a deposit on his new apartment. He'd hugged me, said, "Thanks, Dad," You're the best. I'd felt good about it, proud even. Now, it looked like that money funded their little getaway. I kept scrolling through the bank records, my fingers moving faster as the pieces clicked together. There were small charges too, gas, a coffee shop near the airport, but nothing big enough to explain a resort trip. That's when I remembered Brielle's emergency credit card, the one she said was for unexpected stuff like car repairs. She kept the statements in a drawer in our bedroom, tucked under some old tax files like I'd never bothered to check. I got up, the whiskey buzzing in my veins, and headed upstairs. The drawer squeaked as I pulled it open, and there it was, a stack of envelopes from a card I didn't even have the number for. I ripped one open, dated last month, and started reading. My eyes widened as the charges piled up. $1,200 at a spa, $800 at some fancy clothing store, $450 for lunch with Rochelle at a place I'd never even heard of. Month after month, it was the same, thousands racked up on stuff she never mentioned. The latest statement, unopened, showed new charges for $1,500 at Paradise Cove Resort, plus a couple hundred more for extras. $92,000 total, spread over a year. I dropped the papers on the bed, my hands shaking, not from the whiskey, but from the weight of it all. This wasn't just a birthday snub. This was a whole secret life. I went back downstairs, grabbed a notebook, and started writing it all down. Dates, amounts, everything. The reliable Julian Hartley, the guy who clocked in early and stayed late, who paid the mortgage and fixed the leaks, had been erased. They'd turned me into a walking ATM, a shadow they could step over while they sipped cocktails and laughed. I poured the last of the whiskey, staring at my messy handwriting, the numbers glaring back at me. I didn't cry. I'm not the crying type, but my throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow right. I thought about the years I'd spent building this life, the overtime I worked so Skylar could go to college, the weekends I gave up to keep us afloat. And for what? So they could jet off and mock me? I flipped the notebook shut and leaned back, the couch creaking under me. The anger wasn't loud anymore. It was cold, steady, like a river carving through rock. I wasn't going to yell or smash things. That's not who I am. But I was done being invisible. I'd been the guy who kept quiet, who let things slide, who trusted too much. Not anymore. I took a slow sip of whiskey, letting it burn, and made a promise to myself right there in the dark. They'd remember me, not the old Julian, the one they walked all over, but this one. The forgotten one. The one who'd been watching all along. And I'd start by making sure they couldn't hide from what they'd done. Not from me. Not ever again. 2 days after my birthday, I woke up to the same quiet house, the same empty feeling sitting heavy in my chest. The whiskey bottle was still on the counter, a reminder of that first night, but I didn't touch it again. I'd spent the last 48 hours keeping busy, work, grocery runs, anything to keep my mind off the hole my family had left. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I'd seen enough on Instagram to know they were still at that resort, probably lounging by the pool while I ate cold leftovers alone. My phone stayed quiet too. No apologies, no check-ins, nothing. It was like I didn't exist. But that changed on the second day. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels I didn't care about, when my phone started buzzing. WhatsApp lit up with a flood of messages, one after another, like they'd all remembered me at once. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen, not sure I even wanted to look. The first one was from Brielle. Julian, where are you? Like I was the one who'd disappeared. Then Skylar, Dad, are you okay? Please answer. Maddox chimed in with, Yo, Dad, what's up? You good? I scrolled through 49 messages total, piling up over a few hours. Voice notes too, Skylar's voice, soft and shaky, saying, Dad, I'm worried. Just let us know you're fine. Brielle sent a longer one later. Julian, please don't shut me out. We're flying back early. Talk to me. I sat there, staring at the screen, the words blurring together. Part of me wanted to feel something, relief, maybe, or even anger, but I didn't. It was too late for that. They'd had days to reach out, and now, what? They were scared I'd gone off the deep end? I set the phone down and leaned back, my hands resting on my knees. The house creaked around me, the fridge humming in the kitchen. I could have answered. Could have typed back. I'm here. Where the hell were you? But I didn't. They didn't deserve that yet. Instead, I got an idea. I grabbed my phone again, opened Instagram, and flipped through my camera roll. There wasn't much, just some work pics, a shot of my truck, and then one from yesterday. I'd stopped at the grocery store after my shift, picked up a cheap chocolate cake from the bakery section. It was small, kind of sad-looking, with "Happy Birthday" scribbled in messy icing. I'd taken a picture of myself holding it in the kitchen. No smile, just me and the cake under the fluorescent light. I hadn't planned to post it, didn't even eat the damn thing. But now it felt right. I uploaded it. No filter, no caption, no tags. Just the timestamp. March 28th, 2025, 7:42 p.m. I hit post and watched it go live. It wasn't about being petty. It wasn't some big screw you to them. It was a marker, a quiet little flag in the ground saying, "I'm still here. I see you. And I'm not the one who's missing." I tossed the phone on the cushion next to me and stood up, stretching my arms over my head. My back popped from too many hours on the couch, and I walked to the window, peering out at the dark street. The neighbors' lights were on, warm and yellow, families inside doing normal stuff. My house felt like a shell, but I wasn't sad about it, not anymore. Those 49 messages kept buzzing in my mind, though. They weren't apologies. Not really. They were panic, maybe guilt, but not remorse. Brielle's "don't shut me out" stuck with me the most. She didn't get it. I wasn't shutting her out. She'd locked me out days ago, and now she wanted back in like nothing happened. I shook my head, a dry laugh slipping out. Skylar's voice note played in my head too, her worry tugging at me a little. She's my girl, always has been, but even she'd gone along with this. Maddox? He'd probably just shrug it off if I called him out. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, sipping it slow. My phone buzzed again, another message, probably number 50, but I ignored it. They'd see the post soon enough. They'd know I wasn't sulking or lost. I was right here, watching, waiting. The cake sat on the counter still, untouched, the icing starting to crack. I didn't need it. Didn't need their rushed words either. What I needed was something they couldn't give me yet, answers. And I'd get them, one way or another. For now, I'd let them squirm. Let them wonder. Because I wasn't the guy they thought I was anymore. Not after this. 3 days after my birthday, I was sitting in the living room, the TV on low, some dumb game show buzzing in the background. I hadn't answered any of those 49 messages, hadn't called back, hadn't even looked at my phone much since I posted that cake picture. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting through the blinds, casting stripes across the carpet. I'd just gotten home from work, still in my dusty jacket, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a soft knock. It was sharp, insistent, like someone who didn't want to be ignored. I stood up slow, my boots heavy on the floor, and walked to the door. I didn't know what I expected, but my gut told me it was them. I turned the knob and pulled it open, and there they were, Brielle, Skylar, Maddox, and her parents, Greg and Rochelle, all standing on my porch like some awkward family portrait. Brielle was in front, holding a shiny gift bag, her smile tight and fake, the kind she uses when she's nervous. Skylar and Maddox hung back, Skylar picking at her nails, Maddox staring at his shoes. Greg and Rochelle stood there like they owned the place, Greg's arms crossed, Rochelle's lips pursed. I didn't say a word, just leaned against the doorframe, looking at them, letting the silence stretch out. Brielle shifted her weight, the gift bag crinkling in her hands. "Julian," she started, her voice too bright, "we're back. We wanted to see you." I didn't move, didn't nod, just kept my eyes on her. She faltered, then held up the bag like it was a peace offering. "I got you something. For your birthday." I glanced at it, probably some overpriced shirt or watch she thought would fix this. I didn't take it. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened Instagram. I held it up, Maddox's post right there on the screen. "He won't even notice we're gone, LOL." I turned it so they could all see, my thumb resting on the edge. The air changed, like someone sucked the oxygen out of it. Brielle's smile dropped. Skylar's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Maddox shifted, muttering something under his breath. Greg cleared his throat, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. I looked straight at him, his smug face all red from the sun, and said, "You're not welcome here." My voice was calm, low, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Greg blinked, his mouth opening, then closing. Rochelle stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Now, Julian, that's uncalled for." I didn't let her finish. I said what I said. "You don't get to walk in here. Not after this." I nodded at the phone, then stepped aside, holding the door open just enough for Brielle and the kids. "You three can come in." "They can't." Brielle hesitated, glancing back at her parents, but I didn't budge. Greg huffed, turning to Rochelle like he expected her to fight me, but she just glared, her hands on her hips. After a long second, Brielle nodded at Skylar and Maddox, and they shuffled past me into the house. I shut the door behind them, leaving Greg and Rochelle standing there, their shadows still on the porch. Inside, the living room felt smaller with them in it. Skylar sat on the edge of the couch, her knees bouncing. Maddox leaned against the wall, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. Brielle stood in the middle, still clutching that gift bag like it was a lifeline. I walked past her, set my phone on the coffee table, and turned to face them. "So," I said, my hands in my pockets, "how was the beach?" Brielle flinched, her mouth opening, then closing. Skylar looked like she might cry, her fingers twisting together. Maddox shrugged, mumbling, "It was fine." I nodded, letting that sit for a second. "Fine," I repeated. "Good to know." I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The weight of it was already there, pressing down on them. Brielle took a step toward me, her voice soft. "Julian, we didn't mean for it to be like this. It was supposed to be." I held up a hand, stopping her. "Don't. Not yet." I looked at Skylar, her big eyes all watery, then at Maddox, his jaw tight. "You're here now. That's something. But them." I jerked my head toward the door. "They don't get a pass. And neither do you, not yet." I sat down in my chair, the one by the window, and picked up the remote, turning the TV off. The room went quiet, just the sound of their breathing and the faint hum of the fridge. They wanted to talk, to explain, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Not until I knew they felt this, really felt it. I'd let them in, sure, but this house wasn't their playground anymore. It was mine, and I was done being the guy they could leave behind. The air in the kitchen felt thick as I stood there, facing Brielle, Skylar, and Maddox. They'd followed me in after I shut the door on Greg and Rochelle, and now we were here, the four of us crammed around the table like some messed-up family meeting. I'd grabbed a folder from the counter, the one I'd been filling with everything I'd found. Bank statements, screenshots, credit card charges. It was heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been, and I dropped it on the table with a thud. The sound made Skylar jump, her eyes darting to it like it might bite her. Brielle sat down slow, still holding that stupid gift bag, while Maddox stayed standing, his arms crossed tight. I didn't sit. I stood there, looking at them, and finally asked the question that had been burning in me since I saw that Instagram post. "When did I become invisible to you?" My voice was steady, quieter than I felt, but it hit them hard. Brielle's head snapped up, her mouth opening like she had an answer ready, but nothing came out at first. Skylar stared at the table, her fingers tracing the wood grain. Maddox shifted his weight, his jaw clenching. I opened the folder, spreading out the papers. $3,800 withdrawn from our savings, $92,000 racked up on that secret card, resort charges stamped with dates that lined up with my birthday. I pointed at Maddox's post, the LOL glaring up at us. "You think this is funny?" I said, tapping it with my finger. "You think leaving me here while you're all off sipping drinks is a joke?" Brielle found her voice then, leaning forward, her hands clasped tight. "Julian, it wasn't like that. We were going to surprise you, do something when we got back. It got out of hand, that's all." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing them on the plane. I didn't buy it. I flipped to a screenshot of her texting Rochelle weeks ago, found it in her old phone I dug out of the closet, saying, "He'll be fine, Mom. Let's just go." I held it up, watching her face go pale. "This doesn't look like a surprise to me," I said. "This looks like you plan to ditch me." Maddox piped up then, his voice rough. "Dad, it was just a dumb post. I didn't mean it like that." I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. "You didn't mean it? You wrote it, Maddox. You laughed about it. You took my money I gave you for your place, and spent it on this." He looked away, his shoulders slumping, but he didn't argue. Skylar started crying then, soft little sobs that made my chest ache. She's always been the sensitive one, my little girl who'd climb into my lap when she was scared. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "it was supposed to be for you too. We were all going to go, me, you, Mom, Maddox. But then Grandpa said," she trailed off, wiping her eyes. I leaned in, my hands flat on the table. "Said what, Skylar?" She swallowed hard, glancing at Brielle, who wouldn't meet my gaze. "He said you'd bring down the vibe. Bet you're always so serious, and it'd be more fun without you." The words landed like a hammer, cracking something inside me. I straightened up, looking at Brielle. "Is that true?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at the table, her fingers twisting together. "Julian, it wasn't my idea," she finally said, her voice small. "Dad kept pushing, and I didn't know how to say no." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. You didn't know how to say no? To your dad? But you knew how to say no to me, how to leave me out, how to take our money and run off with them. I flipped the folder shut, the snap of it loud in the quiet. I've been working my ass off for this family, for you, for the kids. And this is what I get? You let Greg decide I'm not worth it. Skylar reached for my hand, her fingers cold. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be like this. I looked at her, saw the truth in her eyes. She meant it. But it didn't erase the hurt. Maddox mumbled something that might have been sorry, but he still wouldn't look at me. Brielle stood up, stepping closer. Julian, we can fix this. Please. I stepped back, out of her reach. Fix it? You don't fix something you broke on purpose. I grabbed the folder, holding it up. This is what you did. You don't get to walk in here with a gift bag and some tears and make it go away. The room went still, just Skylar's sniffles and the faint hum of the fridge. I looked at them, my wife, my kids, and felt the betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. They'd chosen Greg's version of fun over me, and I wasn't sure I could forgive that yet. After that showdown in the kitchen, I didn't sleep much. The house felt different now, like it wasn't theirs anymore, just mine. Brielle, Skylar, and Maddox had left the room quiet. Skylar still crying, Maddox slinking off to his old bedroom, Brielle hovering like she wanted to say more but didn't dare. I'd laid it all out, the money, the lies, the way they'd made me feel, and I wasn't backing down. The next morning, I got up early, the sun barely up, and started making changes. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, laptop open, and pulled up our bank accounts. My hands moved fast, clicking through screens, setting up a new account in just my name. I transferred half our savings, enough to cover 3 months of the mortgage and utilities, into it, leaving the rest for Brielle to figure out. She'd have to start pulling her weight now. I canceled the joint credit card, the one she thought I didn't know about, and set up a direct payment for Skylar's college tuition so it'd go straight to the school. No more middleman, no more chances for that money to disappear. By the time the coffee was cold, I'd drawn a line in the sand. I wasn't kicking them out, not yet, but things were going to be different. Brielle came downstairs around 8, her hair messy, as puffy like she hadn't slept either. She stopped in the doorway, watching me pack up my laptop. Julian, what are you doing? She asked, her voice shaky. I didn't look up, just kept stacking papers. Making sure I'm not invisible anymore, I said. You're in the guest room from now on. Separate accounts. You pay half the bills. Skylar's tuition's covered, but that's it. No more free rides. Her face crumpled, but I kept going. And I changed the locks. You'll get a key when I know you're serious about this. She stared at me, mouth open, then sank into a chair. Julian, this is crazy. We can talk about this. I cut her off, standing up. We talked last night. You didn't listen then. Now you will. I grabbed my keys and headed to the garage, leaving her there. At the hardware store, I bought new deadbolts, heavy ones, and spent the morning installing them. The drill buzzed in my hands, the sound drowning out the noise in my head. Maddox came down as I was finishing the back door, his hair sticking up, still in yesterday's clothes. Dad, what's with the locks? He asked, rubbing his eyes. I tightened the last screw and stood up, brushing sawdust off my jeans. It's my house too, I said. You want in, you knock. You want to stay, you start acting like it. He frowned, but didn't argue, just shuffled back upstairs. Skylar was different. She came out later, her eyes red but dry now, and sat on the porch step while I tested the new key. Dad, she said, her voice small, I don't want you to hate me. I stopped, looking at her, my little girl all grown up and caught in this mess. I don't hate you, I said, softer than I meant to. But I can't trust you yet. You've got to show me you mean it. She nodded, hugging her knees, and I felt that old ache for her, the one that never goes away. I finished up and went inside, resetting the Wi-Fi password next, something simple, Julian 40, but they wouldn't guess it. Brielle tried to talk again when I came back in, following me to the living room. This isn't you, Julian. Locking us out, splitting everything, it's not fair. I turned to her, my hands in my pockets. Fair? You took our money, left me here, let your dad call me dead weight. That's not fair. This is me surviving. She flinched, but I didn't stop. You want to fix it? Earn it. Respect's gone. You've got to bring it back. She didn't say anything, just stood there, tears welling up. Maddox stormed out then, grabbing his jacket. This is bullshit. Dad, he snapped. I'm out. He slammed the door, the new lock clicking behind him. I didn't chase him. He'd figure it out or he wouldn't. Skylar stayed, though, hovering near me the rest of the day, helping with small stuff, bringing me a screwdriver, making coffee. She didn't say much, but she was there, and that was something. By night, the house felt solid again, locked up tight, mine in a way it hadn't been before. Brielle moved her stuff to the guest room without a word, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. I sat on the couch, the new key in my hand, and looked around. This wasn't revenge, it was a wall, a boundary carved in stone. They'd have to climb it if they wanted back in. And I'd be watching, waiting to see if they could. A week after I changed the locks, things settled into a strange new normal. Brielle stayed in the guest room, quiet and distant, coming and going without much talk. Skylar stuck around more, her presence soft but steady, like she was trying to glue something back together. Maddox hadn't come back since he stormed out, and I didn't push him, let him cool off, figure out what he wanted. I kept busy with work, the construction site a welcome distraction, the noise of hammers and saws drowning out the mess at home. But trouble showed up again on a Saturday morning, right when I thought I could breathe. I was in the garage, tinkering with my truck's oil filter, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out, squinting against the sun. Greg's silver SUV sat there, engine still running, and he climbed out, his face red and tight like he'd been stewing all week. Rochelle stayed in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, glaring through the windshield. I leaned against the garage door, rag in hand, and waited. He marched up, stopping a few feet away, his voice loud enough to wake the neighbors. "Julian, what the hell do you think you're doing?" He barked. "Locking my daughter out, cutting her off. You're destroying this family." I didn't flinch, just looked at him, letting him puff himself up. He was taller than me, broader too, but I wasn't intimidated. "Not anymore." "Destroying it?" I said, keeping my tone even. "Funny, I thought that started when you took them all to a resort and left me behind." He waved a hand, dismissing me. "That was a trip. A break. You're blowing this out of proportion, acting like some midlife crisis nutcase." I stepped forward then, closing the gap just enough to make him shift back. "A break," I repeated. "How much did it cost, Greg? That little break?" He blinked, caught off guard, then shrugged. "I don't know, about $7,500. What's that got to do with anything?" I nodded, letting that number hang there, then said, "I put $25,000 into Skylar's education last year. Paid for her books, her dorm, her classes. What VE you done for her future?" His mouth opened, then shut, his face going redder. I didn't stop. "You don't get to stand here and lecture me about family. You decided I wasn't worth bringing along, convinced Brielle I'd ruin your fun. And now you're mad I'm not rolling over for it?" Rochelle climbed out of the car then, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Julian, you're being ridiculous," she snapped. "Brielle's a wreck because of you. She's saying you're cold, unreasonable." I cut her off, my voice sharp now. "She's a wreck because she got caught. You don't get to spin this on me." Greg took a step closer, pointing a finger. "You watch how you talk to us. We're her parents, and I'm her husband." I shot back. Or I was, until you helped her forget that. They stood there, fuming, but I didn't back down. I'd had enough of their high-and-mighty act. "Go home," I said, turning back to the garage. "This isn't your fight." Greg huffed, muttering something about me being ungrateful, then stormed back to the car. Rochelle followed, throwing one last glare over her shoulder. They peeled out, tires squealing, and I watched them go, the rag still clenched in my fist. Later that day, I checked Facebook, should have known better, and saw Brielle's latest post. Sometimes people change, and not for the better. Midlife hits hard. A dozen likes, a few sad emojis, comments from her friends saying, "Stay strong, girl." I stared at it, the words twisting in my gut. She was painting me as the bad guy, the cold one, like I'd snapped for no reason. I could have posted something back, dumped the receipts, the screenshots, the truth, but I didn't. Let her have her story. The people who mattered knew what happened. My buddy Pete from work called that night, asking if I was okay. He'd seen the post. "She's full of it," he said. "We all know you, man. You don't flip out over nothing." I thanked him, hung up, and sat on the couch, the house quiet again. Skylar came down a little later, curling up next to me with a mug of tea. "Dad," she said, "I don't care what Mom says. You're not the one who's wrong." I put an arm around her, feeling her lean into me, and nodded. "Thanks, kid." I didn't need the world to see it. I had the folder, the facts, the loyalty of the ones who stuck around. Greg could yell, Brielle could post, but I knew the truth. And that was enough for now. Weeks had passed since Greg's blow-up in the driveway, and the house had settled into a rhythm I could live with. It wasn't peaceful, exactly, More like a ceasefire, everyone figuring out where they stood. Brielle stayed in the guest room, coming and going with her head down, her words short and careful. Skylar was around a lot, popping in after classes, her quiet company a lifeline I didn't know I needed. Maddox, though, he'd been a ghost since he stormed out, and I let him be. He's my son, sure, but he's a man now, and men have to face their choices. Then one Tuesday, my phone rang while I was eating lunch at the construction site, a sandwich in one hand, dust all over my boots. It was Maddox. I set the sandwich down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and answered. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "can we talk?" I leaned against the truck, the sun hot on my neck. "Yeah," I said. "What's up?" He hesitated, then, "I'm in a jam. Rent's due, and I'm short. Can you help?" I didn't answer right away, just listened to the hum of the site around me. Drills whining, guys shouting. Part of me wanted to say no, let him sink a little, feel the weight of that LOL he'd thrown at me. But he was still my kid. "Come by tonight," I said. "We'll figure it out." He showed up around 7, his hoodie wrinkled, hair a mess, looking like he hadn't slept. I let him in, the new lock clicking behind us, and we sat at the kitchen table. "How short are you?" I asked, pouring him a glass of water. He stared at it, not drinking. 600. I thought I had it, but work cut my hours. I nodded, pulling out my laptop. "All right. We're not just throwing money at it, though. Show me what you've got, bills, pay stubs, all of it." He blinked, surprised, but dug into his backpack, pulling out crumpled papers. We spent an hour going through it. His rent, his phone bill, the little he'd saved. I showed him how I'd always done it for the house, tracking every dollar, making it stretch. "See this?" I said, pointing at the screen. "You plan ahead, you don't get stuck." He nodded, slow, like it was sinking in. By the end, we'd made a spreadsheet. Nothing fancy, just numbers and rows. I gave him the 600 cash from my new account, but I made him write it down. "You owe me," I said. "Not because I'm mad, just so you learn." He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I get it, Dad." He didn't say sorry, not out loud, but later that night, I noticed his Instagram was gone. No posts, no profile, just a blank space where that caption used to be. He asked if he could come by Sundays, just to hang out, and I said yeah, feeling something shift between us. Skylar kept coming too, her visits more regular now. She'd sit with me on the couch, watching old movies, or help in the garage, handing me tools while I fixed stuff. One night, she hugged me tight before leaving, whispering, "I'm glad you're my dad." It hit me hard, that little crack of light in all this dark. Brielle, though, she was still a puzzle. Some days, she'd try nostalgia, talking about when we met, how we'd laughed over cheap pizza. Other days, she'd blame me, saying I'd pushed her away with the locks and the accounts. I didn't bite either way. "You pushed first," I'd say, and she'd go quiet, retreating to her room. I wasn't holding my breath for her to change. She liked her story too much, the one where I was the problem. But I didn't need her to see me anymore. Maddox's Sundays turned into a routine, him showing up with coffee, us working on his budget or just talking. He didn't say much about the trip, but I could tell he was carrying it, that guilt simmering under his tough act. Skylar stayed caught in the middle, loving us both, but she picked me more often, her loyalty clear in the way she'd linger. The fractures were still there, big ones, jagged and raw, but these first steps, these moments with my kids, felt like something solid. I'd let Brielle figure her own path. I'd already let go of needing her to come back. The kids, though, they were enough to keep me going, enough to start rebuilding on. A month after my 40th birthday, I woke up to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty anymore, just still, like the world's holding its breath. It was a Saturday, the sun creeping through the blinds, painting the living room in soft gold. I sat up on the couch where I'd fallen asleep, a blanket tangled around my legs, the TV off for once. My coffee mug from last night sat cold on the table, next to my phone, which buzzed with a new email. I rubbed my eyes, stretched, and picked it up. It was from my divorce lawyer. Short, simple, saying Brielle's attorney had reached out. No fight, no drama, just paperwork moving forward. I set the phone down, leaned back, and let that sink in. It wasn't a shock. Brielle and I hadn't really been together since she came back, not in any real way. The guest room, the separate accounts, the way we barely talked, it was all leading here. I didn't feel sad, though. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I felt clear, like I could see myself again, not just the guy who paid bills or fixed things, but me, Julian Hartley, a man who'd made it through the mess. I got up, made fresh coffee, and stood by the kitchen window, watching the street wake up. Kids rode bikes. A neighbor waved as he mowed his lawn. My truck sat in the driveway, dusty but solid, like me. I thought about that night a month ago, the dark house, the whiskey, the Instagram post that started it all. It felt far away now, like it happened to someone else. I'd changed since then, not loud or flashy, but deep, in a way I could feel in my bones. Later that day, I opened my laptop and logged into Facebook. My status still said, married, but that didn't fit anymore. I clicked edit, my fingers hovering, then typed, it's complicated. I hit save, watched it update, and sat back. It wasn't a big statement. No one needed the details, but it was true. Life was complicated. Family was messy. Love left scars. Some you could see, some you couldn't. I scrolled through my feed, saw a picture Skylar posted last night. Her and me in the garage, me holding a wrench, her laughing. Best dad ever, she'd captioned it. I smiled. A real one, the kind that warms you up inside. Maddox had texted earlier too, saying he'd be by tomorrow with coffee, like always. They were still here, my kids, picking up the pieces with me. Brielle was upstairs, probably packing more of her stuff. She'd been moving things out bit by bit. No fuss, just quiet steps away. I didn't stop her. She'd made her choice long before the papers came, and I'd made mine. I walked outside, the air cool on my face, and sat on the porch steps. The neighborhood buzzed around me, alive and normal, and I felt part of it again, not stuck, not invisible. I thought about the last month, Greg's yelling, Brielle's stories, the way Skylar and Maddox came back, slow but sure. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. My phone buzzed again, a text from Pete, my work buddy. Saw the status. You good, man? I typed back, yeah, better than good. He sent a thumbs up, and I put the phone down, looking out at the street. 40 wasn't what I'd expected. No party, no big celebration, but it gave me something better. Clarity. I could see myself now, not as the guy they forgot, but as the one who stood up, who claimed his place. Skylar saw it. She stuck by me. Maddox was starting too. His Sunday visits proof he wasn't running anymore. Even my crew at work noticed, one of them saying last week, "You seem different, Hartley." Lighter. I was. The weight of being invisible, of carrying them all without them knowing, was gone. I let it go, piece by piece, and built something new. The divorce wasn't a loss. It was a door closing so I could open another. I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and went back inside. The house smelled like coffee, like home, and I grabbed my mug, taking a long sip. I didn't need balloons or a cake. I didn't need Brielle's gift bag or Greg's approval. Being seen by my kids, my friends, and most of all, by myself, was the gift I'd claimed. 40 wasn't a milestone they gave me. It was one I took, and that was enough.